If you are training a martial art and you're not lifting weights, or you are lifting weights but designing your program incorrectly, you are seriously hindering your potential as a martial artist. So let's talk about some of the most important factors to consider when it comes to designing and balancing your lifting routine to get the most benefits out of your training. As a quick background, at the time of making this video, I've been lifting for a little over 15 years now. I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and I've been training for 7 years in jiu-jitsu. I've also worked as a personal trainer with clients for general fitness reasons, but also with clients that competed in powerlifting and jiu-jitsu. And I've been able to learn from some of the smartest minds in the strength and conditioning and bodybuilding world over the course of the last 15 years. Now, I don't say all that to boast in any way, but to give some context on where I'm coming from when sharing information with hopes of having you learn from some of my experiences along the way. Now, number one, building muscle and strength should be important to you. I'm still surprised to hear people repeat the old adage that strength training and adding muscle makes you stiff and inflexible or harms your performance as a martial artist. This is only true if you do not maintain flexibility as you add muscle mass. If you had a stretching routine previously and abandoned it as you got bigger and stronger, then yeah, you could lose some mobility. However, if you're maintaining stretching and you are selecting and performing exercises through a full range of motion, you will maintain your flexibility or even become more flexible. Lifting properly has actually been shown to increase flexibility. Think of it as weighted stretching in a sense. It's also worth noting that many flexible guys that train martial arts are actually hyper flexible, which makes them more prone to injury, not less prone to injury. For example, if you don't strength train and your elbow extends past a certain point, or in other words, you're hypermobile, you may be more vulnerable to strains or tears. And one way to aid this is to build more muscle and strength around the joint to act as a safety to not let it extend too far. Think of muscles around joints as having tension, and some either have too much tension or not enough. And if they have too much tension, you may need to stretch them. And if they have too little, more strength is needed. In other words, more muscle and strength is almost always a net positive for someone training in martial arts because it acts as a muscular armor in a way. It helps prevent injuries and it makes you more durable on top of all the other benefits of strength and power. I can say from personal experience that it's a lot easier to recover from sparring when your body is more robust and able to take the bumps and bruises. I personally prioritize my strength training over anything else, and only then will I train jiu-jitsu. It's the foundation for everything else in my life. Number two, you have to consider fitting modalities to your goals. In the past, I worked as a personal trainer and I still maintain my certification, but one of the things I noticed with other trainers was how many of them would prescribe the same types of exercises to clients regardless of their goals. I've seen them train elderly clients on machines and high school athletes on those same machines with little regard to the specific demands of each client's lifestyle. This is a mistake because you can cause unnecessary amounts of fatigue, leave gains on the table, or underprepare someone and get them injured if the right exercise modalities aren't selected for the person's goals and body type. For example, I'm currently in a phase where I'm simply looking to maintain muscle mass while cutting, and I'm training jiu-jitsu purely as a hobby right now with no competitions planned. Because of this, I'm mainly using machines in the gym rather than free weights. Now, this allows me to focus more on stimulating hypertrophy of the muscles and less on stabilization. An example of this would be doing a machine incline press instead of a dumbbell incline press. With the machine, I don't have to focus on kicking up the dumbbells, balancing them, etc. It's purely about pressing and stimulating the chest on the machine. Now, if I was going to do a competition and I wanted to optimize my performance, I would switch to more free weight exercises to emphasize more of the stability component because of how the benefits carry over to jiu-jitsu and moving in free space. My goal is always to maintain as much muscle and strength that I can, but the emphasis on muscle size versus performance is always in consideration. Machines can sometimes feel better on the joints and allow for faster workouts when you're pressed for time, so these are all things you should consider as well. You need to think about your training in a holistic way and how each choice affects something else. Number three, volume and intensity. You have to pay special attention to the amount of volume and intensity for each exercise and session. For example, a common mistake is to end up with a bunch of nagging injuries from performing a high number of sets, or volume, in the gym while also training martial arts. It's a lot of stress on the joints and connective tissues, and that wear and tear can add up quickly. You need to really pay attention to this because the thing that I've really noticed with martial arts, and especially a grappling art, is that it's very stressful on the joints, so you have to be careful to balance that with lifting, and especially lifting heavier. Again, you have to go back to your goals. If your goals are to increase muscle mass, then consider going with a lower volume, higher intensity approach. There's been all kinds of debate on high volume versus low volume for decades now, but in my experience, maximizing muscular tension by training close to failure with a low volume of sets has worked the best for increasing muscle mass and maintaining it. An example of this would be 2 sets of 6 to 8 reps with 80 to 85% of my 1 rep max. For maximal strength training, such as when I did powerlifting, I've had better results with lower intensities and higher volume, but that won't be relevant for you as a martial artist. Now, when I train myself or others for competition or to emphasize improving skill in the specific martial art as much as possible, I shift training more toward muscular endurance with moderate volume and higher higher reps per set at a lower intensity. An example of this would be 3 sets of 15 to 20 reps with 60% of my 1 rep max. Now keep in mind that these are rough guidelines to describe a concept and not outright recommendations. To do this correctly, you have to evaluate yourself, your goals, your body type, your health history, all that stuff. And if you're training someone, the same thing. You have to consider how your body feels and what your goal is overall. Maybe heavy lifting is too much stress on your joints and you feel better with lighter weight and higher volume. Or maybe a higher volume is too much to recover from and you do better with less work overall and heavier sets. But if building muscle is your goal, you're gonna have to train close to failure regardless of your approach. Unless you have a coach, you have to be your own scientist and experiment with these variables until you find what works best for you. Number 4, you need to sort out your rest days. Years ago, when I was dealing with a bad shoulder injury from wrestling, I worked with a variety of physical therapists that weren't able to help much. After an MRI and a diagnosis of a partially torn labrum, bone spurs, arthritis, and all these other horrific sounding things, they concluded that I would need surgery if I ever wanted to train again. However, I despise surgery and try to avoid them at all costs, and I have a lot of faith in corrective exercise being able to fix most injuries, so I kept looking for alternatives. I eventually came across an injury specialist that changed my views on training in many ways. I learned a lot from his methodical approach to training, and just through corrective exercise, he was able to get me to a point where my shoulder was fixed and I felt better than I had ever had in my life, and I was able to do jiu-jitsu ever since. Now, during the 2 years I spent training under him and picking his brain, he preferred the idea of having complete rest days to allow the body to fully recover. Ever since then, I've put my strength training on my days where I train jiu-jitsu, and I follow them up with a day of complete rest. In the past, I would be training nearly every day in some way or another. For example, I would lift weights on a Monday, then do jiu-jitsu on Tuesday, then lift again on Wednesday, then jiu-jitsu on Thursday, etc., etc. This never gave my body just entire days off to heal. I was always doing something. And once I started lifting in the afternoon and training jiu-jitsu at night, followed by a rest day in between, I felt a lot fresher when it came time to train, whether it was lifting weights or doing jiu-jitsu. This is critical because it allows me to attack each lifting session with more energy, which leads to being able to maintain more muscle mass and strength, or even gaining. It also allows more time for connective tissue and joints to heal, which can take a beating from martial arts and lifting simultaneously. Now, if you're training daily for an upcoming competition, this will be harder to schedule, but I highly recommend having at least 1 to 2 days off completely and scheduling your lifting sessions the day before that day off. Number 5, nutrition. If you have struggled to keep mass on or gain mass while doing martial arts, it's because your diet is lacking. First, calories are king. If you're eating in a caloric surplus, you will gain weight. If you are eating in a caloric deficit, you will lose weight. It's that simple. I go through periods where I track my food intake with an app like MyFitnessPal or Fat Secret for a few weeks, and then I weigh myself daily to see what is happening with my body weight, and then I adjust my calorie intake from there based on my goal. Remember, what isn't measured isn't managed. From there, macronutrients determine what kind of weight you are losing or gaining. In terms of muscle mass, the most important nutrient to track is protein. You should be eating around 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Eating enough protein is critical for maintaining or gaining muscle, and if you are under eating it, you will not recover adequately from workouts or optimize muscle synthesis. That's a weird word to say. From there, carbs are the next important one. They not only give you energy, but they are protein sparing. In simpler terms, the body can use carbs for energy and then free up more protein to be used for tissue repair. There are special cases where lower carb intakes can be useful, but in general, you should be eating plenty of carbs. I've gone through phases of eating 400 to 500 grams of carbs per day at a body weight of 190 pounds and even higher on some days. But again, it depends if you're trying to gain or lose weight. With regards to fat, you need to eat fat to optimize hormone levels like testosterone and the other hormones involved in the hormonal cascade. I personally aim to eat around 70 to 80 grams per day, but this is going to vary person to person and how you feel and how your body responds. In general, start by determining how many calories you should be eating based on your goal, then set your protein and fat intake to a static amount, and then just adjust your carbs up and down based on your goals of losing, maintaining, or gaining weight. It's that simple. Nutrition is the catalyst that allows you to realize the gains from your efforts in the gym and to be ready for the next session, so don't take this lightly. Number 6, recovery and sleep. All of these things I have talked about are critical considerations, but above all else, if you aren't recovering, then none of them matter. Now, managing stress levels and getting enough sleep is huge for not only recovering from all the stress you're putting on the body, but also allowing you to improve your skills as a martial artist much more effectively. When I train tired, my technique is often sloppy and it's difficult to pick up new techniques smoothly. My joints can also ache, and the times I've had more severe injuries, they have almost always come from when I was training tired. On the contrary, when I'm well rested, I feel like I can take on anyone, even if that's obviously untrue. and injuries are just less overall. So if nutrition is the catalyst to realizing your gains in the gym, then sleep and stress management would be the catalyst to the catalyst, if that makes sense. It's the foundation for everything else to take place, and without it, you're severely handicapped and vulnerable to injury. Now, there's more things to consider here that would be tough to cover without assessing your situation individually, but sorting out these foundational principles will take you a long way and maybe all that you need. So anyway, that wraps this one up. Or check out anything I have to offer. Check the links down in the description below. And before you go, you should watch this video next, because you're smart and that's what smart people do.